Fellas, UFC venues tier list. There is so many venues in the UFC, different countries that the UFC go to, and just different places that a lot of the events take place. So today we're going to be doing a tier list of UFC venues. S tier being it's one of the best venues, I hope they keep going there, and D tier being get in the bin. I'm not going to include every single venue they've ever gone to. I'm going to be including the ones that they usually go to on regular occasions. So if if I'm not included one of your favourite venues because it's only been shown once in the UFC, don't be mad. Let me know if I've missed any of the big ones though, like the ones that the UFC go to regularly. Starting off with Australia, I'm going to put Australia in A tier. Yeah, the Aussie crowd are good. The chance that they had in Volk versus Islam 1 was a good chance as well. Yeah, they've been to Australia a few times, and I've liked Australia so far. I've liked Australia, even when they went in or was it the Strickland versus Adesanya fight? I even like the crowd there. I feel like Australia, they're always going to turn up. One of the best crowds in MMA. I feel like in America, they just don't really get behind their fighters. It's kind of like, I don't know, the crowd just seems stale. There's not really any chance. Whereas in places like Australia, there's so many chants going on. You know, the Islam's a wanker chant. And I just really like Australia as a whole. And I'm not even Australian myself, so I'm going to put it in A tier. I hope they keep going there. I know they usually go there once a year. The one thing I don't like, though, is I don't like the fact that they decided to do an Australian pay-per-view with Strickland and Adesanya as the main event. It would have made much more sense to have UFC 290 in Australia, where we've got Robert Whittaker, where we've got Alexander Volkanovski on the same card. That would have made way more sense. Dan Hooker as well, rather than just sticking, UFC 293, and the only Australian fighter there really, well, there's a couple Australian fighters, but the biggest one there you've got is Taito Ivaza. It didn't really make sense, but I like Australia. Hope they keep going there. But yeah, Australia so far has been really good. Next place, we've got Paris. I'm actually going to put Paris in S tier. Listen, we can talk about the fact, I kind of feel bad for France because they've got Soy Cyril Gane as their biggest fighter right now. They've also got Benoit Saint-Denis up and coming, so I hope they keep going there. But the French crowd are really good. Like, they're one of the loudest crowds there. It was like I don't even know if it was a main card fight last time, and they were going wild. So the French crowd, they will go wild for every fight, no matter who it is. It could even be a boring fight, and the crowd will still be going wild, never mind the main event. Sergey Spivak literally froze up against Cyril Gane. But yeah, I really like the French crowd. Probably my favourite crowd in the UFC right now, to be honest with you. That UFC Paris that we had a couple of months ago, one of my favourite crowds I've ever seen. I hope they keep going there. Great crowd. Obviously, if you can't handle the crowd like Sergey Spivak, you're not going to be able to handle it. But no, I really like France. Hope we keep going there. Hopefully Cyril Gane, he stops letting the French down, because his behaviour recently has been terrible. I'm going to have to post a video on that, why I don't like Cyril Gane. But either way, France is a crowd. I'm going to be honest, it's really good. And it's in UK time as well. In the UK, I like watching pay-per-view. I don't like having to stay up till like 4 a.m. for a pay-per-view, so it's kind of in European time, so I can watch the card at like 11 p.m, which is another thing I'm going to be taking into consideration personally. But I'm going to put France in S tier. The next place, the UK. I'm going to put the UK in A tier. Now, it's not in S tier, is because I feel like recently they've been quite dull. Like UFC London back in July, the UK crowd weren't that good. There weren't many chants for Tom Aspinall at all. There was like a few. The one we had in March of last year was really good, but I feel like even UFC 286, the crowd could have been way better then. There were no chants. There wasn't really any Leon chants. It was just booing Leon Edwards. I mean, there was a couple headshot dead chants at the press conference, but I feel like UK, I don't know. I don't think they're good as... I do think they're really good. Definitely one of the best crowds. If we're comparing it to an average venue, definitely one of the better venues, and obviously it's in UK time, but I don't know. I feel like the crowd could definitely be better, but it's in UK time. It's still got a good crowd, don't get me wrong. It's just, I feel like if the fight's not amazing, the crowd kind of goes silent. I've noticed that as well. If it's not like a massive action fight, the crowd kind of just, they don't really say anything. Like, I mean, to be fair, I don't really blame him. Back in July, we had like people like Jai Herbert on the main card who were making it a stink fest, making it the most boring main card ever. And most of the fights on the main card, besides the main and the co-main event, were kind of boring. So UFC London, or London in general, I don't know. It's a great crowd. I just feel like it could be a little bit better. I feel like if we were to only go there like once a year rather than like 2 times a year, I feel like obviously the fans would appreciate it more, but it's still a good venue, don't get me wrong. Next, we've got MSG. I'm going to put MSG in B tier. It's kind of like the place where all fighters want to be. We've just had a card in MSG. We had one last year as well. MSG is just like the best, in my opinion, one of the best places you can go in America. Now, MSG is in B tier because they don't really, like I said about Americans, they don't really go back their country. They might do a little bit of cheering and booing at the press conference and the weigh-in, but aside from that, it's kind of just an average crowd, to be honest with you. There's nothing massively special. I mean, the venue of MSG is definitely one of the better venues. It's massive. You know, it's historical for having some of the best combat sports fights there, whether it be in boxing or MMA. But as a venue itself, definitely not one of my... don't get me wrong, I like an MSG venue, but I wouldn't be extremely hyped to see an MSG venue. I feel like any venue in USA is kind of like... They don't really have a country going behind them. I know I've said that like 3 times now, but MSG for me is one of the best ones in MMA. I'm going to put it in B tier. Decent venue, not one of the best, but it's a solid venue. I wouldn't be mad if there was a fight card there. I mean, we've just had one there, so I'll put MSG in B tier. Pretty solid. Next, we've got the UFC Apex. I'm going to put the Apex in C tier. Now, some people like the Apex because they can hear the shots of the crowd, the shots of the fighters, and that's why I've put it in C tier, but I don't know. I'm not a massive fan of the Apex at all. I'm not really a fan of it. I don't like the fact that... I feel like if it's the Apex, it should be fully silent. Do you know what I mean? Like, the Apex, if you're going to want to hear the Apex shots, it literally should be just the ref, the commentators, the coaches, and the fighters. I don't like the fact that there's still like a couple people in the background. I don't know. It just irritates me. I wish it was just fully silent, or it weren't silent at all, but... I just don't really like UFC cards without a crowd. The crowd bring the atmosphere. Back in 2020, when there was no crowd, UFC was kind of dead. I didn't really enjoy watching the fights as much. I understand that you can hear the shots better, and we have people like Sean Strickland talking in the octagon and moments like that, but as a whole, I'm not a fan of the Apex. It just doesn't have the same energy. You don't get ceremonial weigh-ins or anything, so... I don't hate it. Like, I wouldn't absolutely despise the Apex, but definitely not one of my favourites at all. Yeah, I'm going to put it in C tier. Listen, I wouldn't want every single fight card to be in front of a crowd, but if it's back-to-back Apex, it's not looking good. I'm just not a massive fan of the Apex. Next place is Brazil. I'm going to put Brazil in D tier. I'm actually going to put it in D tier. Now, Brazil does have a crowd, but Brazilians are the worst crowd ever. How could they do that to Glover Teixeira? Glover Teixeira's retirement, and they walked out, and all of them left the octagon, throwing things at opposing fighters. A lot of the time, there's literally nothing wrong with the opposite fighter, and then they'll still be like rabid towards them, throwing stuff. And obviously, I expect them to boo the opposite country. I mean, that's just every country does that. But when it starts getting to the point where you're throwing things, and even their chants are just annoying as well. And I feel like every time there's a Brazil card, there's always something cursed, like whether it's the Glover Teixeira terrible retirement, or it's a pullout of a main card or a main event like we had with UFC 282, I think it was, or 3. It was 283, I'm pretty sure. Or even when it's something like, what is it? Derek Lewis versus Gelton Almeida, where it's an extremely boring fight. I feel like they're really cursed. I'm just not a massive fan of Brazilian crowds, man. I don't really want to go there again. I like Brazilian fighters, don't get me wrong, but the crowd are just terrible. It feels like none of them know MMA, and they're just trying to go there to be an idiot to the opposite fighters. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Brazil. It's kind of dangerous for the fight. Well, it's not really dangerous, but I don't know, when it gets to things like throwing things and just getting involved in stuff like that, I'm just not a massive fan of Brazil, so I'm going to put it in D tier. I don't want to go there again. I feel like Brazilians would do much better in places like MSG, but... yeah, I don't want to go to Brazil again. I don't know why they keep going there. It's obviously not good for the fighters, but either way. And finally, UFC Singapore. They've been there a few times now. I'm going to put Singapore in A tier. Again, really good crowd. I feel like countries that don't really get UFC that often are one of the better crowds because they make the most of it. Like I said, when it comes to countries that are really used to getting MMA there or UFC events, they don't really appreciate it as much as countries that don't. So I'm going to put Singapore in. Korean Zombie had one of the best retirements. Like, we talk about Glover Teixeira's retirement in Brazil. Korean Zombie had one of the best retirements ever in Singapore. And even then, Max Holloway, bringing the glove back to Korean Zombie, it was just an insane moment. I like the card as well. I'm not going to say the card being good makes the venue good, but I like Singapore. The crowd are really good. They're a good crowd. They'll boo every now and then. I don't even think they booed for the main event, to be honest with you. There weren't really much booing. I just like the crowd, a lively crowd, a respectful crowd as well. They're not going to start screaming or walking out the octagon when a fighter retires. Yeah, I've liked Singapore. Nothing bad to say about it. I'm going to put it in A tier. And that is my UFC venue tier list. Let me know if I missed any of the big venues or if you disagree or agree with any of them. But that's just my personal thoughts. Thank you for watching, and yeah, let's never go to Brazil again.